Nestled deep in the Manchurian woods lies a massive stone structure. Inside, you could find Adolf Hitler and his other top Nazi allies, carefully planning every move during World War II. This hidden fortress had conference rooms, communication rooms, Hitler's private bedroom, and even an underground bunker. On the outside were walls over a foot thick. There were guard towers, deep trenches designed to prevent tanks from invading, and minefields scattered across 2 square kilometers of land. If Hitler were to travel back into Germany, he had many other residences that he could operate out of. Hitler had apartment buildings, mountain retreats, government buildings in Berlin, and even several other underground bunkers. But Hitler's life didn't always look like this. Adolf actually grew up in a lower middle-class family, where he moved around very often as a child. How exactly did Adolf Hitler go from living in cramped apartments, a homeless shelter, and the trenches of World War I to then living in luxury and leading one of history's most evil operations? Adolf's story begins here, in the small Austrian town known as Brunel am Inn. Hitler was born here on April 20th, 1889, to his father Aloy and his mother Clara. The Hitlers lived in a small rental apartment inside a 3-story structure near the town center. This location was convenient for Aloy Hitler's job as a customs official, given it sat on the border of Austria and Bavaria. The apartment was a relatively modest 3-bedroom and was typical for Austrian apartments at the time. It's likely that there's no modern amenities in this apartment like indoor plumbing or electricity. Most of the tenants in this building likely used shared facilities like an outdoor toilet and shared kitchen spaces with other tenants. In this 3-bedroom apartment, Adolf's parents had 3 other children that all died before Adolf was born. These children all died from typical childhood illnesses, such as different epidemics and also miscarriages. The loss of these 3 children was especially hard on the mother, Clara. When Adolf was born, Clara became especially close and protective of Adolf, not wanting to lose yet another child. After Adolf's birth in 1889, Clara and Aloy went on to have 2 other children, Edmund and Paula. Edmund also died when he was just 6 years old, leaving just Adolf and Paula to be the only 2 surviving siblings. This 3-story yellow building still stands today and even resembles a similar appearance to when Hitler was born here back in 1889. All that is left from Adolf's past is a memorial stone out front that features a simple inscription: "For peace, freedom, and democracy. Never again fascism. Millions of dead remind us." Hitler and his parents didn't stay in this apartment for long, as Aloy's job as a customs official required that he would move very often. Once Hitler turned 3 years old in 1892, Hitler and his family moved to the Innstadt district in Germany. This was the first of many moves during Adolf's childhood. While in Passau, the likely apartment that Adolf and his parents stayed at is not still standing, but historians say that this apartment was right in the village's center, right next to the River Inn. It's rumored that while Adolf was living here, he fell into the river right by their home and had to be rescued by a priest. Similar to where Adolf was born, this was also a quiet town with narrow streets and several Catholic churches. Adolf only lived in this home from when he was 3 to 5 years old, before the family moved to Hoffeld, Austria. Adolf's parents wanted some more space after living in 2 tightly packed villages, so they moved out to a farmhouse here in Hoffeld. Aloy Hitler was still working as a customs official, so he had to commute north to work up at the border town of Linz, Austria. Aloy moved to this rural plot of land so that he could try farming, but he ended up failing miserably. Aloy's farming ambitions were short-lived, only lasting from 1894 to 1898 before Hitler and his family moved up to Liaodong, Austria to be closer to Aloy's work. At the age of 9, Adolf, his sister, and brother, along with their parents, arrived at this home in Liaodong, Austria. In Hitler's first 9 years of life, he had now lived in 4 different homes. Aloy purchased this small 2-story brick home, which was right across the street from St. Michael's Roman Catholic Church. Adolf was a choir boy in this church and attended Mass regularly here. In the year 1900, now when Hitler was 11 years old, his younger brother Edmund died from measles. Adolf and Edmund were very close, and this death was devastating for Adolf to deal with. Around this time, Adolf started pursuing his dream of becoming an artist. Adolf was using his love for art as a way of getting his mind off the death of his brother. Adolf's father wasn't very supportive of this passion though, and enrolled Adolf in a school known as the Real School. A Real School is a state school that provides students with a general education and didn't have any art department. Adolf deliberately did badly at this school in hopes that his father would send him to a classical school where he could there study art. Back at home, Adolf and his father had many violent arguments over Adolf's desire to pursue art. These arguments all ended suddenly, however, as on January 3, 1903, Adolf Hitler dropped dead in a local pub. This happened at the Gasthaus Stifler, a local pub that Adolf was known to spend time drinking at. Hitler once said that the greatest shame of his life was dragging his drunk father home from this local bar. Adolf was a pretty regular drinker and was known to have health problems from this level of alcohol intake. The Gasthaus Stifler is actually still operating today as a restaurant and pub. The sofa where Adolf Hitler passed out dead in was even still in the pub up until 2019 when a museum took it. Adolf was just 13 at the time of his father's death, and many argue that this was a major turning point in Adolf's life. Back at home, Adolf was now able to spend more time pursuing his love for art, and his grades in school began dropping even lower. Clara Hitler believed it was in her family's best interest to move herself, Adolf, and Adolf's younger sister Paula to a new home. Today, this yellow two-story brick house still stands, along with the church that the family would attend. Adolf Hitler was buried at the cemetery outside this church, and the brick house that the Hitlers once lived in is now used as a storage facility for coffins. Clara Hitler, Adolf, and his sister Paula moved to an apartment right at the center of Linz, Austria. In Linz, there were far more opportunities for the two children, and this location was also much closer to Adolf's Real School. The exact apartment that the family stayed in here likely doesn't still exist today, but it was said to be right in the town center. Adolf was really starting to enjoy Linz, but his time here didn't last very long. Adolf was about to go through something that would completely change his life. But before I get into that, you might have noticed that this entire video is a mix of 2D and 3D animation. These animations can take an incredible amount of time to create, but if you're a beginner and don't have the skills, time, or money to do this, you can check out today's sponsor, NVIDIA AI. With NVIDIA AI, anyone, regardless of skill level, can create high-quality 2D and 3D animations like the ones you're seeing in this video. All you have to do is type in the idea you have for a video to this section, press Generate Video, and then NVIDIA AI processes together a full-length video on this topic. From here, you can fine-tune your video and edit it by using text-based commands. You can start the video with an anecdote, translate the entire video to French, and even adjust the volume of the background music, all just by typing in the Edit command box. You can even clone your voice so that you can use this for all the videos you create with NVIDIA AI. Typical editing softwares have a steep learning curve where there can be hundreds of different tools, all taking time to learn. With NVIDIA AI, you can focus on being the director of your own video, rather than taking the time to learn how to edit. The best part is, you can try NVIDIA AI today for free. This will save you either all the time it would take to edit, or even save you the hundreds or even thousands of dollars it would cost to hire different editors and animators. Try out NVIDIA AI today by using the link in my description, and thank you NVIDIA AI for sponsoring this video. Adolf's beloved mother, Clara, also began having serious health problems. Clara Hitler was diagnosed with breast cancer and soon started spending all of her time in bed. Clara ended up passing away at 2 a.m. on December 21, 1907, while Adolf and Paula were lying by her side. Adolf drew a painting of his mother by her side during her last hours. Clara ended up being buried at the same cemetery Adolf Hitler was buried at, just across the street from their previous house in Leoding. The doctor that was taking care of Clara during this time with breast cancer was a Jewish man named Dr. Edward Bloch. This doctor ended up being the only Jew that Hitler made sure was able to escape Europe during the Holocaust. Following the death of Adolf's mother, Adolf no longer had any ties to Linz and wanted to pursue his artistic ambitions in a bigger city. Hitler had inheritance money from both of his parents and used this money to move to Vienna, Austria. Hitler first rented a room at the address of Stumpergrass 31, a gray 4-story apartment building. Adolf's whole apartment here was just 10 square meters, which was just enough room for a small bed and desk. Hitler paid just 10 crowns a month for this apartment, which is equal to just 42 cents. Even with how much inflation has risen since Hitler was 18 years old, this apartment would equate to just $13 a month in today's standards. While living in this apartment, Hitler was working hard to perfect his art portfolio. Adolf's dream was to attend the best art school in Austria, the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. Adolf finally believed he had perfected his portfolio, so he applied to the school in 1907 and then again in 1908. Both times, Hitler was rejected. After both of these rejections, Hitler remained living in Austria, trying to make ends meet by painting postcards and attempting to sell some of his art out on the street. By 1909, Hitler was now 20 years old and had essentially run out of the money from his parents' inheritance. Adolf was then bouncing between the different homeless shelters of Vienna. Adolf was still working on his artwork in these shelters, but had a difficult time selling them out on the streets. His social circle was very limited during this time, and he avoided making any new friendships. While wandering the streets of Vienna, Hitler spent much of his time reading in public libraries. Much of this literature revolved around German nationalist and anti-Semitic readings, which ended up forming his prejudices and worldviews. Hitler preferred spending time in these libraries rather than out on the streets or in homeless shelters. After about a year of living in these different homeless shelters, Hitler found a more permanent residence. Adolf found a very good deal for just 2.5 crowns or roughly 30 cents a month at this men's dormitory. This 6-story dormitory was one of the most modern for its kind when it opened in 1905. The rooms had gas lamps and light bulbs and were heated with a gas heater. On the ground floor, there was a mess hall where all the residents ate, a reading room with daily newspapers, and even a library. The dormitory also included a room with a physician where you would go if you got sick, washrooms, and even a bathroom with 16 showers and 4 bathtubs. There were roughly 500 men living here at the time. Each resident got their own room that was just 1.4 meters wide and 2.17 meters long, even smaller than Adolf's past apartments. This small of a room would be barely big enough to lay down with your feet extended. Other residents of this dormitory said that they remembered Adolf reading the newspaper in the mornings in the non-smoking area of the reading room. They also saw him painting very often, discussing politics, and even practicing giving speeches to other residents. Despite living in poverty, Adolf refused to accept any help from his extended family and preferred to stay in Vienna rather than moving back to Linz. This building in Vienna still exists today, but is no longer used as a dormitory. This building has been converted into a residential building, which sits in a working-class area of Vienna. After 3 years of living in this dormitory, the year was now 1913 and Hitler was 24 years old. The possibility of a major war was looming, and countries were beginning to mobilize soldiers. The Austrian and Hungarian army were looking for young, physically fit men, and Hitler was just the type. Adolf likely would have been one of the first to get drafted, considering he was living in low-income housing. Adolf had no desire to serve in the Austrian military and wanted to do everything he could to avoid this military draft. Adolf decided that his best option would be to pack up the very few belongings that he had and move into Germany to escape the possibility of getting drafted. Hitler took the train from Vienna and got off in Munich, Germany. The first known place that Hitler lived once he got to Munich was at this guest house above a tailor shop. It's likely that Adolf lived here from May 26, 1913, until he moved out to join the German army in August 1914. Adolf rented out one room in this apartment complex with the spare change that he was able to make, selling watercolor paintings and his other artwork. This building still remains a residential building today, but has undergone many renovations since 1914. A sign was later placed here in 1937, marking it as one of the previous residences of Adolf Hitler. Because Adolf was now living in Germany, he felt like he was finally at home. Adolf was born in Austria, but he was of the German descent. His political views were becoming more radical at this time, and he was getting more exposure to the anti-Semitic and German nationalist views. In August 1914, right after Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, marking the start of World War I, Hitler decided to leave his civilian life and join the German military. Hitler wasn't willing to fight for Austria-Hungary, but he was more than willing to fight for Germany. When Hitler first enlisted, he was sent to barracks close by in Munich. The exact address during his time in military training in Munich is not well documented, but like other German soldiers, he would have been housed in military barracks. The barracks consisted of many different rooms that were all very overcrowded. There was no ventilation and poor hygiene conditions, but this wasn't really anything new for Adolf. Soldiers had daily drills to maintain their combat readiness, like rifle shooting, bayonet practice, and other physical activities. In December of 2014, after completing his initial military training, Adolf was then deployed to the famous Western Front in France and Belgium. Hitler served on the front lines of the German military, meaning he was living in the trench dugouts, field barracks, and wherever his unit was stationed at the time. Hitler served as a messenger runner, where he was constantly traveling through the trenches to relay important messages from one line of command to the other. Many of Hitler's fellow soldiers viewed him as overly serious, politically obsessed, and somewhat of a loner. Hitler would prefer to paint and read rather than socializing. He also completely avoided tobacco, alcohol, and going to brothels, which was very unusual for a frontline soldier at the time. In 1916, Hitler was wounded during the Battle of Somme. He got hit in the leg with shrapnel, causing him to go to a hospital. Adolf was transported to the Pacewalk Military Hospital in northeast Germany. Hitler spent several months recovering here before being sent back to the front lines. Hitler continued his duties as a messenger for the German military, but by this point, it was clear that the Allied powers were going to win the war. In the final months of World War I, during an attack on Hitler's unit, mustard gas was used by British forces. This mustard gas is considered highly toxic and was commonly used during World War I. This mustard gas attack caused Hitler to go temporarily blind and was once again carried out of the trenches. Hitler was then evacuated to the same hospital in Pacewalk, Germany. While in recovery here, Hitler had more time to reflect on his German nationalist and anti-Semitic views. He was extremely upset with the outcome of the war and knew Germany had to one day fight back. Once Hitler had fully recovered in Pacewalk Hospital, he took a train back to Munich. Adolf was now 30 years old and initially stayed in army barracks. Hitler was assigned to a military reserve unit where he worked with the Special Intelligence Unit. In this leadership role, Hitler was spying on any suspected left-wing communist activity within the military and even amongst civilians. Since Germany was in political chaos after the war, he focused on gathering intelligence on socialist and other left-wing groups. Hitler knew at this point that he wanted to pursue a career in political leadership rather than following his lifelong dream of becoming an artist. Once his military enlistment officially ended in 1920, Hitler then moved in with one of his friends during the war, Ernst Schmidt. Adolf and Ernst lived in a small apartment, which was part of this larger guest house. Ernst also served in the same battalion as Hitler during their time on the Western Front and shared many of the same political beliefs. Both Adolf and his roommate Ernst ended up joining the German Workers' Party while living here. This party was established after World War I to stop the spread of communism and socialist movements. Hitler quickly grew recognition within the party due to his unique communication skills and dedication to the movement. Hitler ended up reshaping this party and renamed it to the National Socialist German Workers' Party in February of 1920. Hitler was using propaganda, speeches, and massive rallies to grow the party, appealing to many of the anti-Semitic Germans. By 1922 and 1923, Hitler was even starting to secure the backing of wealthy right-wing businessmen and elites. Adolf finally felt like he had secured enough support to where he was now ready to take a more serious move to control power over all of Germany. On November 8, 1923, Adolf stormed into a political meeting that was taking place at a Munich beer hall. Adolf had with him 600 men and held the political leaders of Germany at gunpoint while they were in the middle of giving their speeches. Hitler was declaring a national revolution and demanded that they would have his support. The political leaders being held at gunpoint, Karl, Lassalle, and Seisser, said that they would all support Adolf, but only because they had a gun pointed at their heads. As soon as Hitler and his 600 men left the beer hall, these German political leaders retracted their statements and mobilized the German military to prepare for Hitler's armed rebellion. The next morning, Hitler led 2,000 Nazi supporters marching towards the center of Munich. They were met by German police, ready to take on this attempt at a violent coup. A brief period of gunfire broke out where 16 Nazis, 4 police officers, and 1 bystander were killed. Hitler escaped the scene and fled to one of his friends' homes in the countryside. This home was 30 miles southwest of Munich and belonged to one of Hitler's closest allies. Hitler was injured and demoralized that the coup had failed. Hitler remained in hiding for 2 days before being arrested on November 11, 1923. Hitler was being charged for treason. Adolf was sent to the Landsberg prison located in Landsberg, Bavaria. Hitler was housed in cell 7 at this prison, which was far from a typical German cell. This cell was actually nicer than most of the apartments Hitler had lived in, where there was a bed, desk, chairs, and even a bookshelf. He had access to books, newspapers, and other writing materials, which allowed him to eventually create Mein Kampf. This book combined Hitler's autobiography with his political ideology, outlining his beliefs in German nationalism and anti-Semitism. This book would later serve as the foundation for what the Nazi Party would become. Hitler was allowed to invite whoever he wanted to Cell 7. This cell ended up becoming the unofficial meeting place for future Nazi leaders, where they all discussed what their future political strategy would be. Many of the prison guards here also shared Hitler's same political beliefs and would allow Hitler to walk in the courtyard freely. Hitler would even visit other inmates and recruit them to his movement once they were set free. Instead of prison breaking him, Hitler now had the time to reformulate his strategy. Hitler decided that he needed to take power legally rather than attempting through force. Although Adolf was sentenced to 5 years here, he only ended up serving 9 months before being released due to some lenient judges and the public's sympathy. Hitler was released from the Landsberg prison on December 20th, 1924. He was now 35 years old. Adolf first began living in this Munich home with one of his close allies, Ernst Hofstadter. Several high-ranking members from the National Socialist German Workers' Party were there waiting for his arrival, with flowers in hand. Many of his supporters had also collected a substantial amount of money and placed it in his room's drawers prior to Adolf's arrival. From this newfound fame and support from donors, Hitler was now able to rent out a second room at this house. He used the small room facing the courtyard as his bedroom, while the room at the front of the house became his living room. In the living room, there was a sofa, an oval table, and a couple of chairs that belonged to the landlord. This house was owned by a Jewish man, Hugo Erengler, who ironically got along very well with Hitler. Hugo said that Adolf never made him feel as though he regarded him differently from other people. Many of Adolf's close friends would say that his insane level of hatred towards the Jewish community was all just part of Adolf's imagination. When Adolf would interact with the Jews in his day-to-day life, the interactions all went very well. During Hitler's time growing his political fame and continuing to unite Germans around his nationalist views, he was also spending time visiting the Bavarian Alps. There was a mountain retreat out here known as Obersalzberg, which was a getaway for Germany's elite. In 1928, the Nazi Party was starting to gain more support from the wealthy businessmen in Germany. Hitler decided to use this new money to rent out a small mountain home that was close to the mountain retreat where all the wealthy people were hanging out. This house originally had just a couple bedrooms, a kitchen, a study room, and a wooden balcony. This was a modest mountain home for the time, but was still likely the largest home that Adolf had ever lived in. Hitler was just staying here temporarily, however. Back in Munich, Hitler finally had the money to upgrade apartments here as well. On October 5th, 1929, Hitler purchased a very luxurious and spacious apartment in a wealthy area of Munich. Hitler had the second floor of this apartment building, which included 9 different rooms, totaling 400 square meters. The apartment was filled with artwork from 19th century German and Austrian painters, some of Hitler's idols. Although Hitler had been gaining support throughout these years, in 1929, the Nazi Party still had just 2.6% of Germany's vote. By 1930, this support greatly increased to 18.3% of the country and became Germany's second largest political party. Now, by the March 1933 election, the Nazis won the national election, receiving 43.9% of the total vote, and Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. This same month, Germany passed the Enabling Act, which ended democracy in Germany and established Hitler as a dictator. By this point, the security level increased significantly around Hitler's apartment. The other rooms in this apartment complex ended up renting out to Hitler's private bodyguards and other Nazi employees. Bodyguards would be outside this apartment at all times, allowing Hitler to safely enter and exit this apartment. Many of these bodyguards were made up of the SS, which were the law enforcement personnel of the Nazi Party. Because the apartment was connected with other buildings, the roof and the attic were constantly guarded with one SS officer stationed there 24 hours a day. Even the chimneys had mesh coverings over them to prevent any explosives from being dropped into the building. The ground floor had a guard room, and all visitors were carefully checked. Also, in the year that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, he purchased the mountain home that he had been renting for the past few years. Hitler ended up transforming this wooden mountain home into a massive residence that served as both a personal retreat and also as the headquarters for Nazi leadership. New wings were built on this house to allow room for staff and other political leaders. A large stone terrace was also added to give the home panoramic views of the Bavarian Alps. There were massive conference rooms, dining halls, and even a movie theater installed. The SS took control of security at this residence and established a heavily fortified perimeter. Underground bunkers and tunnels were constructed in the case that Hitler needed to escape from an air attack. The entire Obersalzberg retreat nearby was transformed into a Nazi compound. There were numerous residences here for the Nazi Party's most high-ranking officials. Despite this relaxed setting tucked away in the beautiful Bavarian mountains, many key decisions related to the Holocaust and World War II were carefully planned here. On top of the mountains in this region, Hitler was gifted another luxurious mountain retreat on his 50th birthday. This mountain retreat was known as the Eagle's Nest and offered panoramic views of the surrounding mountains and hills. The Eagle's Nest was accessible by only a single road, which was built specifically for this mountain retreat. Unlike many of the other residences in this region, Eagle's Nest was primarily used as a place to relax, rather than being used to discuss important strategic decisions. Hitler and Benito Mussolini did have a famous meeting here though in 1942, as World War II was in full force. Hitler didn't visit this residence very often though, given he had a true fear of heights. Some of the workers here also said that he had a deep fear of being poisoned from his food. Because of this, Hitler had SS officers and other Nazi staff try his food before he would. Hitler would then wait an hour to see if they would drop dead. No SS official or Nazi staff member ever dropped dead after trying Hitler's food. Unlike Adolf's residence down in the mountains, the Eagle's Nest wasn't destroyed after the war and still remains relatively intact today. Getting elected as Chancellor also meant that Hitler would now live in the Reich Chancellery, located in Berlin. This was the official Chancellor's palace. The Reich Chancellery included the Old Wing, which was constructed back in the 1800s, along with the New Wing, which was constructed under Nazi rule in the 1930s. Hitler's office was located in the New Wing. This office was a massive room with very tall ceilings. The office had a large desk and even a map used for strategic planning. Adolf didn't sit at this desk very often though, as he preferred a more active standing posture during meetings. One of the more well-known rooms in the Reich Chancellery was the Hall of Mirrors, which was used for many different ceremonies and meetings. These spaces were designed to make a strong, intimidating impression, especially for political leaders in other countries that were coming here to visit. Hitler was also said to have bizarre late-night meetings in his office here, where he would keep his top generals and allies awake until 3 or 4 in the morning. Hitler would often start rambling about history, astrology, and even crazy visions for the future. These generals would complain that instead of focusing on military strategy, Hitler would go off on tangents about his destiny and his belief that he was chosen by history. Like out in the mountains, the Reich Chancellery also had a massive underground bunker system where Hitler and other Nazis could take shelter. This bunker was known as the Führer Bunker and became especially important in the last days of Hitler's life. Once World War II broke out, Hitler didn't want to lead the military from Berlin. Hitler wanted to have a home that would be closer to where the military operations were taking place. That's when the German military built Wolf's Lair in the Manchurian woods of northeast Poland. This fortified complex was strategically close to Hitler's operations in the Eastern Front, especially as German forces were invading the Soviet Union. This home was built in 1940 and was chosen for its seclusion, being surrounded by dense forests and difficult terrain. Wolf's Lair was over 2 square kilometers and featured Hitler's personal bunker. This bunker was well protected with concrete walls and surrounded by anti-tank obstacles. Adolf had offices down in this bunker and a small dining area for him and his other high-ranking officials. Radio communication rooms were also installed so that Nazi leaders could communicate with their generals out on the battlefield. Despite the insane security of this bunker, Hitler was almost assassinated here on July 20th, 1944. A German officer named Claude von Stauffenberg attempted to kill Hitler by planting a bomb in his meeting room. This bomb was hidden in a briefcase. Although this bomb exploded, the briefcase was moved just far enough away at the very last moment. Hitler survived and only experienced very minor injuries. This near assassination led to a brutal crackdown on anyone who may be conspiring against Hitler. As the Soviet army began successfully advancing towards Germany, Hitler was forced to abandon Wolf's Lair. Hitler evacuated back to Berlin and spent most of his time in the Führer bunker. Before making this move, the German army destroyed much of the structures in the Wolf's Lair to prevent the facilities from falling into enemies' hands. Today, the remnants of Wolf's Lair still exist as a tourist site in Poland. The ruins of the bunkers, roads, and walls are all still very visible to the public. Back in Berlin, Hitler had to abandon the Reich Chancellery as Germany was losing the war. Hitler was forced to stay in the Führer bunker under the Reich Chancellery. He moved in here full-time on January 16, 1945. This bunker had multiple different entrances and escape routes where the walls were up to 12 feet thick. In the final months of the war, Hitler made all of his military's decisions from the office in this bunker. Hitler's mood was apparently filled with paranoia and disbelief that Germany could actually be losing this war. By late April 1945, Soviet forces had taken over all of Germany and were encircling Berlin. By April 28, 1945, he appointed his closest allies as his successors and new Nazi leaders, knowing that his life was coming to an end. The next day, on April 29, 1945, Hitler married a woman named Eva Braun in a small private ceremony down in the bunker. Only a handful of witnesses were present for this ceremony. The ceremony was followed by a small meal and drinks, despite the dire situation outside. Finally, on April 30th, 1945, both Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun committed in this bunker so that Soviet forces wouldn't be able to capture their bodies. Both of these bodies were carried out of the bunker and brought to the garden at the Reich Chancellery. Here, the bodies were burned, per Hitler's request. Although Hitler lived in some extremely heavily guarded compounds during his time leading Germany, many of these residences still don't compare to Vladimir Putin's homes. One of Putin's homes along the Black Sea is valued at over $1 billion, arguably the most expensive home in the world. You can find out what this home is like, as well as Putin's many other residences scattered across Russia, in this video right here.